Our focus today is going to be on inverse and contrapositive conditional statements and how they work just using an if-then statement. So there's going to be some reviewing of the conditional idea of the if-then statement. We're also going to look at this idea of indirect reasoning. So if I can tell by looking at something if something is true, if I've got some ways to be able to prove something is true without having it come right out and say that. So we're going to kind of look at both of those ideas today. Now, first of all, just as a review, a conditional is an if-then statement. So if I wrote if P then Q happens, that's an if-then statement, so it would be a conditional. Now, a completely non-mathematical example here, but if you use the example, if you kick a dog, then the dog will bite you. It is an if-then statement, even if it's not mathematical. So just a reminder that the if part, if you kick a dog in this case, is a hypothesis. The then part, then the dog will bite you, is the conclusion. So again, if you don't know these two pieces, it's going to make it hard later on to be able to do the contrapositive and the inverse, because that's going to be our focus of today. So let's get to the first kind of example with this. It's actually the negation. The negation is when you take a statement and you write the opposite thing about it. So a lot of times people will use this symbol to stand for negation. This actually means the negation of P. So if you see kind of the little Nike swoosh, that stands for the negation of P. So if my example is that angle ABC is an obtuse angle, to do a negation would be to add this not in there. These two now have the opposite meaning of each other. And that's what a negation is. So on some of these, they're going to ask you simply to just write a straight negation. And that means just take the opposite meaning of what's ever there. So if it's is, make it is not. If it's is not, then take off the not and make it is. So pretty straightforward. Now the next example we're going to look at is a contrapositive. A contrapositive is a conditional that switches the hypothesis and the conclusion, and it negates both of them. So remember how we started out with if you kick a dog, then it bites you. We take the if and the then and switch it. So the bite comes first and the kick comes second. And also we have to make them opposite meaning. So notice that it's does not now and didn't here. Now grammatically you may have to do some slight changes in what you're doing to make the sentence kind of read grammatically correct. So you and your partner or someone else in class may write slightly different meanings for your sentences, or slightly different ways of writing it, I guess, but the meanings will be the same. That's going to be part of what we're going to work on today as well. Okay, next one. Inverse. An inverse is a conditional statement that negates the hypothesis and the conclusion, but there's no switching here. So in this one, the kick stays first and the bite goes second, but we negate both of them by adding the don't and you won't. Again, remember, somebody could read your sentence and do something slightly different, and they would still be able to have the same answer and have it be correct. And just know you just have to be careful when you're writing them. Okay, so contrapositive, negation, and inverse is where our focuses are going to be today. So let's take a look really at our first example. In our first example, it tells us that they want us to write the negation. So remember, a negation is just when you take the opposite meaning. Now, a lot of times, you'll see me do this. I'll write negation, and then just write opposite meaning. Just reminding me that I don't have to change, the position of things, just what the meaning is, the truth of it. So if this one is not, then if I take this not out, that would be the negation. So I could write A, B, C, D is a convex polygon. Now remember, they're still expecting that it's going to be in a complete sentence. So don't change so much that it doesn't make sense what you're posting there or what you're writing. But you want to make sure that you change the meaning. So this not was kind of the piece that we took out of there. And that changed the meaning to be exactly the opposite. Now, number 2, write the inverse and contrapositive of the conditional statement. If triangle ABC is equilateral, then it is isosceles. So if I were looking at this statement, first of all, if I'm going to write this, remember from what we just did, that an inverse is when you negate the hypothesis and the conclusion, but you leave them in the same spot. So if I were going to do this, actually the order of doing inverse first and contrapositive second is probably a pretty good thing. Oh, sorry, contrapositive, like that little abbreviation there. So if I were going to look at this one, it might be something to consider. I'm actually going to type this. It might be a little bit easier. So here's my little piece. So if I'm going to take the opposite meaning, then I could do if, now remember I don't have my little triangle symbol here, so I guess I'll just type the word triangle. If I could spell it right, oh my gosh. If triangle ABC is not equilateral, then it is not isosceles. Again, all we did from this statement to this one is make it from is to is not, and from is to is not. Oh, let's make that C, my bad. Now, if I'm going to do a contrapositive, I have to not only take the negations, but I have to switch them. So isosceles would have to go first, and then the equilateral would have to come after it. So again, if triangle ABC is not isosceles, then it is not equilateral. So remember, part of this is still a sentence. That part hasn't changed. But I had to kind of take this if and the then part and switch them. Now, good example for later on, because you are definitely going to see some more of those. Okay, now this is, I think, the trickiest one that's up here. So they want us to kind of look at which two statements can you not have. So part of this is going to be actually drawing some things and seeing what you can come up with. So let's talk about this for a minute. I'm actually just going to grab a line. If I talk about things that are coplanar, remember usually that means we're going to draw some kind of parallelogram, even though it's not quite a parallelogram. And I'm going to go through and I'm actually going to put my points on there. So let's see what we can do here. So in this one, okay, where's my pen? There we go. P, Q, and R are coplanar. So if they're coplanar, they're all on the same plane. So if I were to do P, Q, and R, you can see all of these being on the same plane, no problem. Now if I look at number 2, it talks about collinear, which means can they be on the same line. So I want you to just take a look at this. If I were to draw a line, I can connect P, Q, and R on the same line, and they can be on the same plane. So as of right now, we really don't have an issue with 1 and 2 happening at the same time. But let's take a look at 3. On 3 it says angle PQR is 60 degrees. So if we can imagine right here that I have this angle that's 60 degrees, and I have P, Q, and R on it. No problem. I can see that. I can even see drawing some kind of a plane and having that on there. That would certainly work. But there's no way that you can have these lined up and have a degree of 60 at the same time. If I looked at this, actually, a straight line gives me an angle of 180. So if I'm looking at this piece here and I want to talk about which ones contradict each other, there's no way that 2 and 3 could happen at the same time. So if 2 and 3 can't happen at the same time, then that means that they contradict each other. Now you're going to see a lot more pieces in here that they're going to ask you about mathematical ideas. Things like coplanar that we had up here. Things like collinear that's up here. Degrees. Those are things you're going to start to see more and more discussion about. So it's important that you understand mathematically what they mean, but also I really want to make sure that you're clear about how to use the words. So again, keep those things in mind. Refer back to your notebook. Your notebook should have all of the information on there that will give you things like coplanar, collinear. A lot of those math terms came from chapter 1. So don't be afraid to go back and use them.